The topic for today, do you want to kick us off with that?
Sure. Yeah. I think we're going to talk about artificial sweeteners today and whether they're good or bad for you, or if they're good diet aid. You know, I guess we'll
Yep.
get into it and see.
Yeah, definitely a hot topic because they're everywhere in our food supply. I mean, it's in almost every food you can think of, usually a combination of different sweeteners too. And a lot of people are wondering, like, are these things okay for you? Should I take them out of my diet? Can I use them? Are they better than sugar? Like, what's the answer there? So we're going to try to dive into that a little bit and give our perspective on it, I guess, and we'll see what we all think about it. But I thought maybe I'd just kick us off with like, why are people using artificial sweeteners? Because I do have an appreciation for these things because, there is a good reason behind them. It's not just because people love adding chemicals to their foods, right? It's because we like sweet things, but we do recognize that sugar it causes a lot of health problems, from weight gain to diabetes and so on. So people are trying to be proactive and take that step to reduce sugar in their diet. And as a result, what they turn to are these artificial sweeteners, hoping that that'll be a better and healthier alternative to sugar. And I guess that's what we're going to get into today is, are they a healthier alternative or are they not? And should you use them or should you not? So, and I'm sure you guys know plenty of people who use a lot of artificially sweetened foods and products, right?
Yes.
This is ubiquitous. It's all over the place. Okay. So maybe we could start off by, just in case people don't know, we can list a few examples. I'm wondering like what you guys can come up with off the top of your head as far as artificial sweeteners go.
The one that comes to mind the fastest for me is stevia.
Yep.
Then there's a sugar alcohol there, starts with an E.
You're thinking of erythritol. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sucralose.
There's two of them. Yeah. Sucralose. That's another one. That's the brand name is Splenda. Yep. Got some more?
There's so many more, right? I guess aspartame.
Aspartame. Yeah, that's a huge one. I wonder if aspartame might be the most commonly used artificial sweetener. It's either that or Splenda, but I think it's actually aspartame. And especially if you just count how much diet soda people drink. I mean, diet soda is a huge, product in our country, and aspartame is the preferred sweetener in diet sodas.
Really?
Yeah, it's in almost all of them. Yeah,
it is the mostly used one. I do know that.
Okay.
There's also like saccharin.
Saccharin is another one. Yep.
That's Sweet and Low, right?
Yeah, Sweet and Low is the brand name of saccharin. Yep. With aspartame, some of the brand names are like NutraSweet or Equal, if you've seen those. Yep. Josh mentioned stevia. Xylitol, that'd be another one. Some people might have seen that in some products. That's getting popular these days. And then I also added to the list monk fruit extract, which is another one. Have you heard of that before, either of you?
No.
I've heard of it, but I don't think I've ever seen it in anything.
If you check the labels of some more like natural, like health food kind of products, you'll probably see monk fruit extract in some random things. They put it in some protein powders and various like nutrition bars and stuff like that. And that's actually a healthy one. That would be on my healthy list.
And that's like what, a natural sweetener that, doesn't act or doesn't like accumulate like fat in the body?
Yeah, right. Yeah, correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Is that in Primal Kitchen's bars? I thought I saw that there.
I'm pretty sure they probably do use it. Yeah.
Yeah.
All of those kind of health conscious companies are using usually either stevia, xylitol, or monk fruit extract, or occasionally like another sugar alcohol like erythritol. Yep.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. So, boy, maybe just right off the bat, before we get into anything, where do you guys stand on artificially sweetened things? Like, do you use any of these sweeteners or use any products that have any of them in it?
So for myself, the only one that I've used occasionally, but I don't like the taste that much, is stevia. I have used that, but being that, like, I take the perspective of not consuming much sugar and needing the sugar taste as much. So I'm okay with using maple syrup, raw honey, and so I'm not looking for substitutes per se. I do know like the big one there, the aspartame, that is linked to a whole host of really scary things. And so I wouldn't ever touch that. I know, Andy, like there's protein bars and whatnot you've mentioned that have the sugar alcohol in there, the different variations. And that, from what I've seen, seems to be okay. And I digest that fine. It has a weird taste to it. Sometimes you get gassy after.
Yeah, that's the big thing with sugar alcohols.
Yeah. But overall, honestly, in our whole house, or even in the foods, I think I may have a thing of liquid stevia, and that's it. So yeah.
How about you, Ricky?
So, I know that the FDA, has done a lot of research and a lot of study on all these, and they classify all of them as safe based off of their research.
GRAS,
So,
GRAS, generally recognized as safe. 2 thumbs up. So
we're not gonna discredit the FDA or anything. I just want to say that, but they're not everything that they deem as safe is healthy, if that makes sense, or what you should be consuming.
Yep.
So just take that, I guess, with a grain of salt. But
I think that was really well put. That not everything that they categorize as safe is healthy. There's definitely a difference there. And we're not saying that these things are necessarily unhealthy, but to me, healthy means it's actually health promoting. It's going to give you some nutrients. It's going to give you things that your body needs. And some of these things, even if they're not unhealthy, they're not doing anything for your health. Maybe there's something that you can get away with using and you might not have any negative consequences, but they're not healthy in terms of like promoting health.
Right. Like, so like Josh said, I'm not really opposed to, natural sugars. Like if I drink milk, I'm not gonna, I don't really care about lactose and stuff like that. Or I'm not really worried about fructose in fruit, But, if I do go for an artificial sweetener, normally I go with a natural sweetener, not an artificial sweetener. So it's actually a natural sweetener. Yep. And like Josh said, it's normally stevia. And I use it. I can think of one time where I make my vegan chili and I use stevia in order to sweeten my vegan chili slightly.
Wow.
Interesting.
So that's the only thing I can think of where I put it in. Otherwise, I tend to just I keep my sugars low, but they're all just real natural sugars.
Okay. Yeah. So I think I'm kind of in line with you guys so far where I try to limit the amount of sugar that I have in my diet. I know that over consuming sugar is going to lead to problems down the road that I don't want. But I do allow myself some sugar. And if I've been particularly active, if I've worked out or whatever, then I know that I can just use that and it's just going to refill my muscles with glycogen and I'll be fine. So generally speaking, if I want something sweet, I'm going to go with just real sugar. And I'm just staying cognizant not to go overboard on that. Although I do use certain products like I think my whey protein has a little bit of stevia in it to give it some sweetness. A couple of the protein bars that I eat have stevia, maybe even a little erythritol. And I really like xylitol a lot. I don't use it in like baking or anything like that usually, but I have gum that I chew that's xylitol based, and my toothpaste is also xylitol based. Xylitol is actually, we'll get into this in a bit, but it's good for your teeth. Okay. That's kind of cool. Yep.
I didn't know that.
So they make their way into my diet too, but generally I would sweeten with just something that's naturally sweet, honey or whatever, and just not go overboard. Yeah.
One thing, Ricky, you brought, or Andy, you mentioned it, was the GRAS list there from the FDA, is it? GRAS. I recommend everyone listening to this to pull that list up. So Google like GRAS ingredients, FDA, or somehow find the generally regarded as safe list, and it'll blow your mind.
A lot of stuff on there that you can't pronounce.
A lot of stuff on thousands of things you can't pronounce. And I guess now, I don't know if you guys have heard this, but are those ingredients, do they have to be listed on an ingredient label. I've read a few different things that there's an exception that because it's regarding
These sweeteners, do they have to be listed?
No, not the sweeteners, but I'm saying the stuff on that grass list.
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I've read before that there's quite a few of those ingredients making their way in. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but
well, the big caution there, whether they have to be listed or not, is that these a lot of these things go by like several different names.
Oh,
So
yeah.
for example, I believe they have to list monosodium glutamate, MSG, the flavor enhancer, but they don't have to put MSG. There's like a million names that it goes by. And one of the names that it goes by is natural flavors. So if you see something on the list that says somewhere in the ingredients, it says natural flavors, that could be MSG. They're allowed to just refer to that as natural flavors. So whether some of these things on the GRAS list have to be listed or not, they might be listed by some sort of alternate name that, obscures what they actually are.
Do you avoid that then, the natural flavors? Like you just...
It kind of depends on the company. If it's a company that I think is using, because natural flavors means a million things. Sometimes it's just like a fruit essence or something, So if it's a company that I trust, that I think doesn't use MSG, then I don't worry about when it says natural flavors. But I know that if you buy something from let's say Nabisco or something from the junk food aisle and it says natural flavors, that's probably what it is.
Yeah, I don't think your seltzer water that has natural flavors has MSG in it. But
wow.
So we'll get into the negative effects of some of these. Maybe we'll look at each one just very briefly, just so the audience knows what some of these things do to you or what they are. But I thought maybe instead of starting on the negatives, because that's going to be a slightly more interesting part of this, we'll talk about some of the health benefits of a couple of them. So I guess if I was to put these things on a spectrum, there are some that I'm more willing to consume than others. Maybe we'll talk about those ones that we're more willing to consume. We already started doing that. We mentioned Stevia and Xylitol and so on. So for example, Xylitol, I should have just grabbed my toothpaste so I could show you, but Xylitol is being used in a lot of dental products now. It's been well researched in that area, and it's been shown to prevent cavities. And actually, I think it has an effect on the good bacteria in your mouth that you want to have there that are actually good for dental health. So now there's dental products coming out. Like I said, I buy this. There's a company called Spry, SPRY, and they make xylitol-based toothpaste, mouthwash, chewing gum. And I actually keep some of the chewing gum in my car so that if I eat something when I'm away from home and I can't brush my teeth afterwards, I can chew some xylitol gum after and get the food debris off my teeth and replace it with that xylitol, which is good for your teeth. So that's kind of a cool thing there, the xylitol. One thing about xylitol, though, is that it is a sugar alcohol. And as Josh mentioned, sugar alcohols do cause GI upset in some people. But usually that's when you go overboard with it. And xylitol is less likely to do that than some of the other ones. Another one is the monk fruit extract that I mentioned. You'll see that most people don't buy monk fruit extract, although if you go into a specialty store, I think you can find it and use it in baking and stuff. I've never tried that, but I know that a lot of products use it, and it does just taste sweet and it tastes good. Contains a lot of antioxidants, and it's anti-inflammatory, which is really cool.
Wow.
In fact, the compound in monk fruit extract that makes it sweet is also the same compound that is anti-inflammatory. And it's been shown to reduce several markers of inflammation in studies like NFKB and interleukin-6 and COX-2. So it's pretty powerful in that area. So I like those two a lot. There's another one that I didn't mention before, but chicory root. You might have seen that on some products and some ingredient lists. Chicory root is it's a soluble fiber, inulin, which is actually a prebiotic fiber, which is good for your microbiome. It gives them something to feed off of, the good bacteria in your digestive tract. So that's kind of cool. And it's also sweet. So companies use that to sweeten things. That's another one that in very large amounts, I made this mistake. It can cause GI upset. So there's, I remember a couple of years ago, I found a sugar-free ice cream, and I was in the mood for some ice cream, and it was sweetened with chicory root.
Yeah.
And I think I got a pint of this ice cream. And a serving is like, there's 4 servings in the pint. And I decided to eat the whole pint. And I was just like super bloated and gassy afterwards, because I think I consumed something like, I don't know, 30 grams of fiber from chicory root extract. So you can imagine that would do some, cause some upset there. But as long as you keep it in like a good, appropriate amount, it shouldn't cause any GI upset.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one that I would put on like the good list possibly would be stevia, which Josh already mentioned. There's no health benefits per se to stevia. It's more of like benign. It seems to be not harmful, but also not health promoting in any way.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just caution that it hasn't been like super well studied. There's a lot of research out on it, but it's still fairly new. So they could find something down the line saying that stevia isn't good for you, but it seems to be super safe, based on all the evidence so far.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
and I don't know if there's any that you guys would add to the list as far as good or whatever, but those are kind of the same ones you come across, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like definitely choosing natural sweeteners over what I think we're going to get into as the bad sweeteners, which are also known as artificial sweeteners that are created in a lab. Though I think that's the main difference. Like everything you named were natural sweeteners.
Yeah.
I think that's what we all gravitate towards, and obviously don't try to abuse those either.
Yeah. Chicory root, monk fruit, stevia comes from a leaf. Xylitol comes from like birch.
Yeah. Comes from various plants. Yep.
Yeah. So, okay. So that could bring us then to the other ones.
Well, first off, one thing, what's the benefits for the good ones? Like, people listening will want to know, like, why use those in substitute for regular sugar?
Well,
right. So, go on, Ricky. You got this.
Well, the only thing that I know, I mean, Andy, you can definitely add on probably more, is that natural sweeteners can actually be broken down by the body.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases they can, give you fiber or other sources of energy, because there are some natural parts to those that your body can use, but they're all not stored as fat. So none of them will be fat storage.
Mm-hmm.
Versus artificial sweeteners, while they claim that they don't build up like fat storage. I don't know if Andy has found any literature on this one or not, but I think that they can trick your mind in certain ways and also spike insulin in certain ways that can cause fat storage within the body as well, because they're very closely resemble sugar. So insulin can't really distinguish between them and sugar.
Yeah, pretty interesting topic there for sure. Yeah, with the health benefits, Josh, aside from like the xylitol being good for your teeth, chicory root being good for your gut in small amounts, stuff like that. What Ricky said is exactly right. The main health benefit to using any of these artificial sweeteners is going to be that you get to avoid sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I almost look at artificial sweeteners almost like nicotine gum or nicotine patches. I wouldn't recommend that people go chew nicotine gum, but if you're a smoker, that's far worse. And if you use nicotine gum as a stepping stone to get you off of cigarettes, and then later on you can get yourself off the nicotine gum, that's a good progression.
Well, that's a really good analogy. Yeah, I like that. So then for people listening, when we say the insulin is the reaction or the insulin sensitivity is different than regular sugar, can you explain, like, if you're eating a cookie made with a cup of sugar versus stevia, what's the difference on the body?
In terms of insulin dynamics, you're going to get a huge insulin spike from consuming a lot of sugar.
Okay.
Obviously that's pretty well known. And anyone who's pre-diabetic or worried about their blood sugar levels and blood glucose control wants to keep insulin low to kind of correct that metabolic dysfunction. So they're trying to avoid excessive carbohydrates and especially sugar. If you're using stevia or any of these sweeteners that we've mentioned so far, it's not going to cause that same insulin spike. There is a concern, as Ricky mentioned, about some of these things tricking your brain or your body into thinking that you're getting sugar, and maybe that can cause a little bit of an insulin release.
Yep.
And that has been shown to possibly happen with a couple of the ones that we're going to talk about. But even the ones where that does happen a little bit, it's still far less insulin than you would get from sugar. So it's, even if that does happen a little bit, it's still, you're better off in that regard than consuming sugar.
So if people need a stepping stone then from like desserts and whatnot, let's say it's homemade or they're buying them, they should be looking for those healthier ingredients with the artificial sweeteners as opposed to sugar, right? To get
I think people's mindset should be to try to reduce sugar in their diet. And so they're looking for things that are lower in sugar. And if they see on the back that the sweetness in the product is coming from stevia or xylitol or whatever, then that's what they're looking for. That's a good thing, because they still want that sweet flavor in, you know, whatever it is that they're eating, but they're trying to reduce their sugar. So that's where these things come in really handy for people.
Well, and I do think that's a really good benefit. I think that it can also cause people to overconsume things that they think are healthy because it has artificial sweeteners.
Yes.
And so whenever I say, okay, it may be a smaller spike in insulin than, let's say, a natural sugar, or not, I shouldn't say natural. Yeah. Natural sugar, not natural sweetener. But okay. So a natural sugar will spike insulin higher, but obviously all the organisms and all the, like all your organelles inside your entire body can utilize that. Your muscles, your brain, your liver, everything can utilize sugar, but none of them can utilize an artificial sugar. So normally they say you'll just excrete it. It'll just come out as waste, right? But if you're consuming something that, let's say, contains fat with, let's say, this artificial sweetener, and you're still spiking insulin, I think if you're over consuming that fat while you're also, let's say, so that sugar cookie that you said, that fake sugar cookie, it's going to have butter or some other fat in it. And if you eat, let's say, 10 of those when you would have only eaten 2 regular cookies, you can cause some issues that way.
And that's a perfect segue to it, like the next thing I want to talk about, Ricky, because what you just mentioned about how it changes your behaviors, that's the more interesting discussion for me. And that's what I wanted to get into at the end, because the next thing that we're going to talk about is kind of looking at some of these ones that are the more artificial, as Ricky mentioned, less natural. And the truth is, I'm pretty heavily against some of these things, but my objection isn't actually necessarily all that science-based or rooted in evidence, because the truth is there's a lot of research on some of the sweeteners that are popularly used that we're going to talk about now. And most of the research indicates that they are actually probably safe. Maybe there's some very rare adverse effects, or like it relates to like ultra high consumption of some of them. But generally speaking, like, I don't want to fear monger and say that, aspartame is going to give you cancer and Splenda is going to, do this or that or whatever, when the research shows that they're actually pretty safe, to be honest with you. My objections are more the behavioral kind of stuff, like, promoting overconsumption. So we'll go through like kind of what the science says about these, and you guys might be surprised that they are actually a lot safer than we might think, as just chemical food additives coming out of a lab. But then after that, we can talk about why we still maybe wouldn't want to use these. So maybe let's just jump into, I guess the first one I've got is sucralose. Sucralose is Splenda. So everyone's heard of that. 600 times sweeter than sugar. And by the way, these things do have a little bit of calories to them, but the reason that they come out as basically 0 calorie in foods is because they're so much sweeter than sugar that they have to use a very, very tiny amount. So the calories end up being negligible. So like Splenda, 600 times, sweeter than sugar. My main concern with Splenda is that it has been shown to change your gut flora. And that's a reoccurring thing with a lot of these. It will kill some of the good bacteria in your microbiome. We don't know much about the long-term effects of that, but we do know how important the microbiome is. So to me personally, if I know that something can disrupt my microbiome and throw off my good bacteria, I don't want it in my diet.
Because like for people listening, that may not understand, when the microbiome is disrupted in a negative way, that leads to probably hundreds, if not thousands, of negative effects on the body.
Yeah.
So that is I don't want to overlook that, because that's a big thing.
Yeah, and the microbiome is really, it's not very well understood yet. It's like on the frontier of research in human health. So we don't even know how altering it can affect your health and like what long-term consequences there could be there. So it's just something that I would prefer not to mess with. I know how important it is to my health, so I don't want to take a chance of screwing it up with some of these things. There's also some concerns, like Ricky said, Splenda might lead to some insulin secretion. It's been shown to stimulate intestinal cells to release certain incretins, which begin insulin dynamics. But then there's also a lot of follow-up studies that have been done showing negligible insulin release after consumption of Splenda. So the studies are all over the place with this. And it's probably just highly variable based on everyone's individual physiology, But to me, the main thing with Splenda is just the disruption of the gut microbiome. And that's going to be the case with almost all of them that we talk about. Next one, we can talk about aspartame. Did you guys look into that at all? That's NutraSweet equal, 200 times sweeter than sugar. Not sure if you guys looked into what aspartame does or how it's broken down or anything.
Well, I've heard so many different things on that throughout the years.
And that's why we're doing this. That's why we're doing this episode, is because we want to clear up the confusion among people who are into health like we are. You'll hear a lot of people just throw out like aspartame is terrible for you, it's going to give you cancer and all this and whatever. And we want to, I'm not a fan of aspartame at all. I don't use it, and I'll talk about why later. But I do want to clear up that there's a lot of fear mongering.
Yeah.
But yeah, you said you've heard a lot of things about it, right?
Yeah, like lab rats getting cancer, from aspartame. I've heard that it has high levels of formaldehyde in it. And again, I haven't verified any of this, but I've heard so many different things. I've heard it contributes to ADHD. There's a bunch of things. So I'm sure that maybe you can clarify some of this.
Sure. So like the stuff that we're doing the podcast for someone like you, and there's gonna be a lot of listeners like you who've heard all those things, but haven't gone to verify them. And there's been thousands of studies done on these things. So it's really hard to, but there were early studies showing that it was linked to cancer, and especially brain tumors. So that was a huge concern early on. Follow-up research kind of dispelled that rumor, but it kind of still lingers in people's minds and is passed around. It's probably not likely the case. I think more research is showing that it's not carcinogenic, maybe unless you went way overboard with it. But then also anecdotally, you hear about people getting headaches are a very common complaint, sometimes migraines, and then there's also occasional reports of seizure. So you do hear some anecdotal issues with aspartame. But Josh, you mentioned the formaldehyde. Aspartame is it's made up of 3 molecules: aspartic acid, methanol, and what's the other one? Phenylalanine.
Yep.
So the aspartic acid isn't really a big deal. That's you get a lot of it from protein anyway. The phenylalanine is a big deal if you're a fetal or a phenylketonuretic, but you would know that from birth. For most people, it's not a big deal. The only issue there is maybe the methanol that's in aspartame, and that's what is metabolized into formaldehyde after you consume it. But once again, that sounds scary, aspartame is metabolized into formaldehyde, consume. And that is extremely toxic in high amounts, but the amount in aspartame is 1/1000th of what your body naturally produces. Your body naturally produces formaldehyde as a byproduct of various reactions, and your body produces more than what you get from aspartame. So again, a lot of things there that are kind of concerning, and that maybe make me think I don't really want to put that in my body. But based on research, there's not enough of a negative consequence there to really play out as any sort of like, real life consequence from consumption of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So that's kind of interesting. One of the biggest issues I have with aspartame is just, it's an indirect thing, but just that it's in diet soda.
Yeah.
And diet soda is terrible for many, many other reasons. It leaches calcium from your bones from the acidity. It's bad for your teeth. So, if you allow diet soda in your diet, you're definitely doing bad things to yourself. It might not necessarily be the aspartame, but that's something you want to wean off of.
Yeah, so let's not give people permission to go drink lots of diet soda here, because aspartame doesn't give you cancer.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's just why I wanted to throw that in there. Aspartame may not be terrible for you in the long run, may or may not. I don't know. More research probably needs to be done, but diet soda is definitely bad for you. So, so we'll put that on there. Another one, acesulfame potassium, also called Ace K sometimes. You've probably seen that on some labels. That's one that I don't really have much to say about. Once again, rat studies show that it might have some negative effects on the microbiome. Plus it's shown to have some weight gain in some rats, which is funny because people usually use artificial sweeteners to prevent weight gain. But overall, like majority of research again shows it to be like fairly long run. So that's Ace K or acesulfame potassium. Saccharin, I think that's the last one I've got, and that is Sweeteners Law, which was actually, that's one of the first ones, and that was banned back in the 1970s in the United States due to some studies showing that it causes like bladder cancer in rat studies anyway. But then it was unbanned later on because they decided that the evidence wasn't strong enough that it was actually carcinogenic. But it's still banned in many other countries around the world. So saccharin, thankfully, we don't see it in too many things these days, but still you might go to like a diner and see little packets of Sweeteners Law. So it's still out there, but it's definitely one that I would avoid. And like I said, it's banned in several other countries around the world because over health concerns.
Wow.
Yep. And that one also definitely affects the microbiome, very similar to the way that Splenda does. So again, I don't want to disrupt my microbiome. I'm staying away from Splenda and saccharin for sure.
Yeah, I definitely think we need to do an episode on
one more thing about saccharin is just that it's inflammatory to the liver. What's that?
Oh, I definitely think we need to do an episode on the microbiome because it is very important, and I mean it
definitely should.
It regulates almost like everything that happens in your body. I mean, it's essentially is your metabolism in some respects. So I have a huge, I don't want to consume anything that really would disrupt it or take any antibiotics that could disrupt it. So there's a whole host of things that if you can't digest something, that's going to cause a whole lot of issues in your body.
I want to.
Yeah, like you said, Ricky, it's your microbiome does control a lot in your body. There's a major amount of communication between your brain and your gut, and the gut is sometimes referred to as your second brain. So people think that the brain like controls everything and just sends signals out to the rest of the body, but the gut and your microbiome actually send a lot of signals to the brain, telling the brain what to do. And so you're right. Yeah, the microbiome controls a lot of things that happen in your body related to your metabolism and other things. And I just don't want to screw that system up.
Yeah. So even if these things aren't deemed as harmful or carcinogenic or anything, do at least note that if it does disrupt your microbiome, it could do a lot more damage to your body than you think. And I think that's why it's linked to weight gain in a lot of ways. That, and also they've done rat studies. I don't know if you looked into this too, because I hope we get into this, is where you associate sweet with 0 calories. Your body's saying, hey, this is sweet, but there's no calories. So it kind of tells your brain that. So then in rat studies, it hasn't been done in humans because some humans are smart enough to regulate what they put in their body. But if you're not, and you don't watch, just like the rats did, they tend to overconsume sweet things in the future if it does contain calories. So I thought that was another interesting side effect of artificial sweeteners or natural sweeteners.
Yeah, and I think of like,
definitely is,
the microbiome. sort of like a really nice forest or like pasture that's grown with all this great, foliage and, undergrowth, and it's layered and beautiful. And then you have a logger or a hurricane or something that comes through,
A wildfire.
a wildfire, and just wrecks the shit. And then, yes, it'll restore, replenish, slowly, come back to where it was before over a long period of time. That's the microbiome. And it's something myself where I'm constantly thinking of how to preserve that natural flourishing state, because when we are constantly disrupting that positive state within the microbiome, I think that this is probably one of the leading causes of depression, anxiety, sleep issues, lack of focus. I could go on and on and on, and I don't have the research or the science or the studies, but knowing that it is the engine room for the body, or one of them, that when we keep screwing it up, with bad meals, bad drinks,
Bad drugs.
bad drugs, it's like a forest that never has a chance to heal and get back to homeostasis. And so it's that constant battle. And so, yeah, I'm trying to avoid as much as I can that's going to screw that up.
So I'll throw out the last one I had, then we can get to the fun part of this discussion. The last one was just the sugar alcohols, and that'd be like erythritol, mannitol, sorbitol. We've seen usually they end in OL is another one. And there, as far as like some of the ones that we've had on this, let's call it the bad list, sugar alcohols might be the safest or the best choice. The worst thing I think I've found is that they might cause GI upset and bloating, or gassiness, but that's only if you consume a lot of them. And that's kind of an individual tolerance sort of thing. So anyway, that wraps up the little bit of like looking at some of these more artificial ones that are so prevalent. And like I said, when you look at the science, to be like totally honest, they don't look like they're terribly unsafe or unhealthy. And I think people could consume those for their entire life and probably live a long, healthy life without any sort of adverse effects. But that said, I avoid them completely, and I'm kind of against other people using them too, or I encourage people not to. And maybe we can get into the discussion now about why, leaving the science that we just discussed aside, why we don't want to see them in people's diets or why we don't use them.
Well, the big thing that comes to mind on my end with that is because most likely if you're consuming foods with those poor artificial sweeteners in it, I would wager that the other ingredients within that food aren't good for you.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you look at like...
Are not, you say?
Yeah, are not good for you. Yeah. In many cases. Fake food, it's not vegetables, it's not fruit, it's not meat. And I'm not saying in all cases you could have a healthy protein bar, whatever, and have some good benefits with that. But when you're talking about real natural food, if there's a reason they're in there, and I think that a lot of times they're filled with a bunch of other shit on the ingredient list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Josh.
Yes, exactly. That's a big one for sure. Is we try to encourage people to eat real. I'm sorry, Ricky. We encourage people to eat real food and to avoid processed foods. And where do we find most artificial sweeteners? They're in processed foods. And you're right. Generally, if you find a product that has, Splenda and aspartame or whatever in it, if you read the rest of the ingredients list, you're going to see that you've got something there that's like 90 unhealthy. And it's going to contain a lot of other things that you don't want, even if the artificial sweeteners aren't the major problem.
Yeah.
So they're kind of a good proxy for, is this a healthy food or not? If they're in there, then it's probably not a healthy food overall. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's good, Andy. I think that's something definitely people should look at as the other ingredients in those things. Cause I would argue that, while artificial sweeteners themselves may not be causing the weight gain, if that's something that you want to avoid, it normally is a lot of the other ingredients associated with that type of food that's causing that. And if you look at a lot of people that consume artificial sweeteners, they tend to be the ones that are a little more overweight, or I don't know how to word it correctly, but it's, if you stick to natural foods with natural sweeteners, you tend to be much healthier. Your microbiome is much healthier, and you tend to be in better shape versus people that try to stick to these artificial things. And it's just a huge shift.
And that's exactly what I was trying to get to there. That's what I was trying to get to there, was that we know that whole real foods are going to be the most nutritious and are going to lead you to the healthiest body type and the greatest health overall. And whole, real, natural foods don't contain these. So if you're eating something that contains these, then you know you're not eating whole, real food.
So definitely, I would say if you're consuming these, try to limit your consumption.
Yeah. So Andy, what's the good takeaway here with all of this for people?
One is overconsumption of calories, because we know that hyper palatable foods cause you to eat more. And one of the things that makes foods hyper palatable is that sweet flavor. In addition to things like flavor enhancers and artificial flavors and stuff, like these foods are engineered to make you overeat. So even if it's not the let's say the Splenda itself that causes the weight gain, it's still leading to a behavior that causes weight gain. And if you're eating the stuff with artificial sweeteners, then you're just eating processed foods that don't have all the vitamins and minerals that real food would. And what's the other thing I was going to say? Oh, food addictions. A lot of people are really addicted to sweetness. You know, people are trying to overcome sugar addictions and stuff. And artificial sweeteners just kind of keep you on that. Even if you're not consuming sugar, you're still kind of addicted to that sweetness. And we've all seen, like, so many people see real whole foods as being like bland and blah, and they don't want to eat that. You know, you give a kid an apple 100 years ago and they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. But now you try to give a kid an apple and they're like, this doesn't taste like anything. It's bland, you know, because they're so used to eating hyper palatable, super sweet, like candies and desserts and stuff. So that's kind of one of the big takeaways for me on why artificial sweeteners cause problems, is just that promote the wrong eating habits and the consumption of more food.
You know, what do we think we would, I guess, wrap up this topic with for people, or any big takeaways? I think the malnutrition piece there, Andy, that you just said, I think that's huge. Like, are we consuming foods that are actually nourishing us and like providing a benefit, or are we just consuming calories? And so, you know, I'm looking at food as a drug that should be benefiting me some way, somehow, and not just eating calories. And I think you said it really, really well, that a lot of people are so malnourished. It's not maybe that they're eating, let's say, horrible foods that will kill them. They're just not eating foods that are promoting life.
Right.
Right. And so, you know, when we're eating blueberries and, you know, real natural foods, we're actually giving ourselves injections of good shit versus just saline. Right. And that's what that cardboard food filled with chemicals is saline, regardless of if it's healthy or not. It's not providing us benefits. And, you know, the other thing too is that you had said the hyper palatable thing. I see this a lot in kids where they have almost lost their taste buds or the sensitivity within their taste buds for things like an apple or blueberries, or, you know, things that we find very sweet and almost like candy. Like, I think blueberries are like candy. But now these kids now are used to so much sugar and sweeteners. And like you said, I think it maybe was not stevia, there was another one in there, but you said 600 times sweeter than sugar. Sugar, to me, maple syrup, honey, regular white sugar, that shit is sweet. And that should be sweet. But the generation that we have coming through, you know, vegetables are blah, you know, they need to be dressed, you know, soaked in some kind of dressing. You know, we've lost our sensitivity to these primal, really good foods that are nourishing our bodies. And to me, that's sad. And I think that over time, and I will say, now that I'm on a little tangent, I was one of those kids living on Rice Krispie treats and soda and all that shit. And I thought vegetables and fruit, real fruit, was gross. And so, but I will say that I'm 38 now, and this was probably shortly after college, 2 or 3 years after college, where I started revamping everything. And I would say for the past 10, 12 years, I have had a great appetite and taste buds for normal, whole, real foods. And so I rebuilt my taste buds, and anyone listening to this can do that.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I was going to direct listeners to Ricky, and I did a podcast together a while back about taking an evolutionary approach to health, and you know, trying to make sure that our diets and our lifestyle are evolutionarily consistent, like with our biology. The biggest issues with these things is, you know, one of my biggest rules is I know that nature works. That's what we've done for 200,000 years, and people were very, very healthy for a long time, eating what the earth gives you, animals and plants. And my rule is just to always try to keep things as natural as possible. These things, there's going to be a lot more research that comes out in the following years. They're still somewhat experimental, you know, even if they've been around for a couple decades, like we're still learning about them and their long-term effects. And why experiment on yourself? They're completely unnecessary. Nature's provided everything that we need, and that's actually healthy and health promoting. I don't really, we just include these things because we want to have like new flavors, and we're just so addicted to sweetness, and we want to make things taste better. But I don't want to experiment on myself that way. Once you get on more of a real food, natural diet, real foods are delicious. Once you've kind of like readapted your taste buds to eating real whole foods again. And so I just don't want to mess with that, you know, going against my biology by experimenting on myself with stuff that only came into existence in the last 20 to 50 years. Yeah. So anyway, I think we're kind of at the end of this thing. To me, I think we've kind of hit everything, and people kind of know our stance on artificial sweeteners. Is there anything that you guys wanted to add before we wrap up? Because I think I'm pretty much good.
For myself, you know, I look at it as with the foods that I'm consuming is, you know, does it come from an animal, the soil, a tree, you know, the water, you know, natural sources. And so I'm not, you know, totally opposed to artificial sweeteners, but I think we've sort of beat it to death. You know, are we nourishing and providing good mechanisms for growth and positive mental clarity and, you know, all of that stuff, or are we just filling ourselves with cardboard? And I would recommend people start filling themselves with more good food. They'll probably feel a hell of a lot better.
Yeah, because I want to reiterate, nature is so much smarter than any scientist. We've all grown and evolved together, and we all contain what each other needs. And I can tell you right now, as a scientist, I don't know everything that's in every type of food. And I know that it wasn't long ago, we didn't even know what vitamin C was. So whether it was 100 years or 200 years ago, you know, we knew that this one thing was important. We didn't know how it was important. And now look, once we determined, oh, that we now call it vitamin C. It was actually called something else before. I forget the actual name. And it was, and it's just amazing. Like, what are we going to discover next that we're like, oh man, we should have been adding this to everything, or, oh, we should have had this in everything. And now, but nature already has it. So why play these games, like you guys said, with your body?
Perfect. Yep. Sounds good to me.
All right. So I guess we're wrap up this episode. Thanks for everyone for listening. Feel free to subscribe on any of the platforms you're listening to this on, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes. We're going to be starting having a whole series of guests come on, which we're super pumped about. We got some really good ones lined up for everyone. So stay tuned. If you're interested in learning more about what we do, co-movement.com, online coaching, in-person coaching, the whole deal. And yeah, send us an email, info@co-movement.com. All right, we're signing off. Thanks, guys.
Yep, thank you.